Welcome to Talking Nuclear, the APLN podcast on which we engage our senior network members on issues nuclear. We started this initiative to capture the rich experience and expertise available in our extensive network. The members have been there, done that, and hold a rich repository of information on what worked to create a sort of a global nuclear order. Of course, the order has never been perfect, but there were a set of rules that were brought in to allow peaceful use of nuclear technology while constraining proliferation. Today, we seem to be sleepwalking into disaster. Can we arrest this slide? How should we go about it? To take us through the current nuclear landscape, look back at the past, successes and failures, and to look ahead into the future, we have with us today Mr. HMGS Palihakkara, former Foreign Secretary of Sri Lanka. He has over 37 years of civil and diplomatic service under his belt. He's obviously had several diplomatic assignments around the world, but from the nuclear dimension, the ones that particularly stand out are as Sri Lanka's ambassador and permanent representative to the UN in New York, a permanent representative to the CD in Geneva, a member and chair of the UN Secretary General's Advisory Board on Disarmament Matters, and as advisor to the president of the NPT Review and Extension Conference in 1995. He also has extensive experience in work relating to preventive diplomacy, peacebuilding, having served as a commissioner on the Presidential Commission on Reconciliation and Lessons Learned in Sri Lanka. He was also a member of the UN Secretary General's Intergovernmental Panel that updated the UNSG's comprehensive study on nuclear weapons. So there's a lot that we want to talk to him about. Welcome to Talking Nuclear, sir.
Pleasure, Manpreet.
Sir, I want to start with your experience at the Conference on Disarmament, a body that achieved a lot and then now for the last several years hasn't been able to even get an agenda on the table. So during your time, when you were a part of this organization, was the nuclear landscape different, you think? Is it the current nuclear landscape that is what is getting in the way? Are there any specific risks that you find in today's times that are very different from the time that you were a member of the CD?
I would say the most glaring difference is now unfolding in the Middle East. And as we speak, an unprecedented and violent manifestation of this difference. This difference in a very volatile West Asia, where nuclear weapon proliferation of Iran is alleged to be at the epicenter of these troubles. So the world is aghast, but the post-war interstate system is either unable or unwilling to prevent this, what I would call brazen militarization of what is essentially a diplomatic task of negotiation. Negotiation not only towards non-proliferation, but negotiating end to conflict. So that, to me, is the glaring difference, a dangerous one, and an avoidable one, I think. That, I think, is staring at us.
But within the CD, I mean, why don't we have a treaty for the last 25 years? You know, the fissile material cutoff treaty has been on the table for such a long time. Why have we not gotten anywhere?
There are two schools of thoughts here, and from my own experience and the experience of most of my colleagues, both from the nuclear weapon states as well as non-nuclear states. First group of people who think and who do not want CD to negotiate on nuclear issues think that multilateral organizations are not technically equipped to negotiate on such a complicated issue. At least that is the pretext, if not the real reason. But on the other hand, non nuclear states, who are the large, overwhelming majority of the CD membership, they feel it's not a question of lack of competence, or it's not a question of lack of technical backstopping or knowledge. It's the political will. It's a conscious decision by certain countries not to negotiate there, because especially the nuclear states at that time, they believe, rightly or wrongly, another debate, they believe that they will lose leverage and negotiating advantage by negotiating multilaterally. In support of this, many countries, including my own country, Sri Lanka, and many number of even Western countries and Eastern Bloc countries have always pointed out, it's not an incompetence issue. CD has demonstrated that it is able and willing to negotiate and produce a number of very important multilateral treaties, including our topic today, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And the Biological Weapons Convention and the CTBT. I think the good part of technical aspects were negotiated there. And of course, the most important and most complex treaty of all, the Chemical Weapons Convention. Now, there is another procedural thing that has been brought out into this debate, which is that CD works by consensus. That is a rule. Why? Because the treaties concluded by consensus have a greater chance of compliance because it's shared by everybody. Negotiations, at least that is the theory. but this consensus rule, it has been said quite justifiably, I would say, has been abused as a veto. It has happened, especially on nuclear issues.
So, since we are talking about consensus, and the NPT review conference also works on the basis of consensus,
Yes.
we've seen in the last two NPT review conferences, we've not managed to get a consensus document. Since you were there at the time when the extension and review conference happened, um, what was the thinking at that time? Because after that, a lot of people have come up to argue that because the conference was given an indefinite and unconditional extension, the leverage that the non-nuclear weapon states had with the NPT was somehow, given up by doing that. So, in hindsight, do you think that was a good decision at that time?
I have to say that NPT's survival strength has already been tested to the limit. Article 6 stands unfulfilled. I'm afraid new NPT runs the real risk of getting unraveled. This is the concern, I believe, my friend and colleague Rafael Grossi, who was a contemporary of mine, who is retiring IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi. He was a distinguished colleague representing his country, Argentina. He said recently on CNN, I heard, that it would be a dramatic mistake to have 20 more nuclear weapon states. It's the double the number mentioned by John Kennedy nearly 40 years ago. He feared about 10 countries. Now Rafael fears. Of course, he was very diplomatic in saying that. But in our frank exchange terms, it's a stark warning. So NPT will not be able to withstand that pressure. The sooner the nuclear weapon states, especially the depository states, in particular the United States, let me be frank, fail to understand this reality, nuclear non-proliferation cannot live in a disarmament vacuum. It has been a disarmament drought, which you said, no treaty for 45 years, not even talks on talks. Never mind the treaty, talks on talks. So it won't withstand that. And especially now that when powerful countries decide to bomb their way into non-proliferation, not negotiate their way into non-proliferation, uh, then the countries might decide the only way to prevent aggression is to actually acquire the bomb. Negotiations won't close the door for aggression. Even in hindsight, I believe many of the overwhelming majority of the NPT parties believed that lesser number of fingers on nuclear trigger is better for the world, irrespective of whether the nuclear weapon states go back on their promises, irrespective of whether new nuclear weapon states emerge. Lesser number on nuclear trigger is better for world security, better for the security of smaller countries whose first line of defense is the rule of law and treaty compliance for their security. But what would not be correct now for the nuclear weapon states to take this for granted and behave as if Article 6 of the NPT did not exist. I think the quagmire that is going to be created in the Middle East as a result of this brazen aggression to allegedly to promote non-proliferation will backfire. Actually, more countries will now seriously think. There are many countries who are capable, maybe 2-3 screws away from producing a bomb.
And I quite agree. I mean, the balance between non-proliferation and disarmament, which the NPT was trying to achieve, and which was the grand bargain, that hasn't been
Yeah.
fulfilled. And that, I think, as you're pointing out, the challenge of horizontal proliferation today is certainly being more starkly felt than ever before. But since
Right.
since we've said that disarmament bargain has not been met, that side, the nuclear weapon states have just not moved. And you have been part of the UN Secretary General's advisory board on disarmament
Yeah.
matters. You've even chaired that body at one point. So tell us a little about this. I don't think many people are aware that there is such a body that exists. So who sits on this? What is its mandate? And what do you think is the future of disarmament?
Yeah. um, the advisory board was actually created pursuant to a very specific recommendation of another historic disarmament arms control consensus of 1978, the first special session of the United Nations on arms control and disarmament and international security. 1978, as young diplomats, then we took part in it and observed with degree of admiration the extent of convergence of views and even the most adversarial looking parties willingness to come together and devise maybe at a lower common denominator, yet in the sense of universal consensus on how to proceed to achieve non-proliferation and disarmament as co-terminus objectives. So, disarmament advisory board was created then. So it was Secretary General of the United Nations was to appoint, I believe, a 15-member board representing not necessarily only government representatives, but the independent thinkers, analysts, journalists, and military people, so on and so forth. But 15 members who will give independent views and initiatives on two things. One, the disarmament, arms control, related security-related agenda items of the United Nations, plus new initiatives that Secretary General could take to advance the cause of international peace and security at the lowest possible expenditure on armaments.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about your experience in the field of peace building and preventive diplomacy, since you were such a key member in Sri Lanka, which faced, problems of this nature. From your experience, what are the issues that stand out as being necessary for peace building?
Oh, unfortunately, there is it's the political will, nothing else. The political will. Look at the conflicts, the freewheeling conflicts in the world today. If if you pay even a scant attention to the rule book, not only the charter but the corpus of treaties, conventions, resolutions of the United Nations, subscribed to by all of us, big and small, the pathway is clear. Pathway is the pathway diplomacy negotiations, not the use of brutal force. And only if it fails, the use of force under multilateral authorization, not unilateral determination. That is the only pathway. And when that doesn't happen, see what happened in Afghanistan. See what happened in Iraq. See what happened in Libya. Many other places. And Vietnam, of course, predates, but nonetheless, similar situation. You get into a quagmire. And, the UN decisions about war and peace are not taken within the United Nations. It's you bypass the UN and take decisions about war and peace, and calls upon the UN only as a humanitarian debris collectors. In both cases, UN is used as a very expensive tool for humanitarian debris collection, but it is available as a cheap tool for preventing those things. So it's not being used. That's the pathway, is better use of available multilateral system. Instead, we are trying to shut down that system by denying funds and financial and political capital. But right now, the UN Peacebuilding Commission is woefully inadequate to deal with this complexity. It's a forum for another geopolitical debate, but not a technically equipped and properly resourced place to handle that kind of guidance. So unfortunately, immediate solution is to maximize the usage of existing equipment, not to try to create new machinery, which is impossible right now in the current fraught situation.
Absolutely. I think these instruments were built at a time when, countries could come together on some basics. Right now, we seem to be so divided on the very basics of everything. But since you are coming from Sri Lanka, I cannot but not ask you this question about, in this situation where the sense of rules-based order seems to be fraying so quickly. What does it mean for a small, non-nuclear island nation like Sri Lanka? I mean, what are you hoping for, where we are in a situation of might is right? What are you looking forward to in terms of bringing back that sense of rules-based order?
Sri Lanka is a NPT party, and we don't have the intention or the means to possess nuclear weapons. But global nuclear tension can still affect our security, economy, and environment, the environment in which we live. Hence, Sri Lanka's active profile, involvement in nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation diplomacy. Because, as I said, we really feel that in a fraught geopolitical rivalries and tense geopolitical environment, I think everybody's security is our security also. To keep away. Not only do we not ourselves get involved, we have a vested interest in preventing conflict amongst other people. Sri Lanka is strategically located. We derive a lot of income from the east-west, major shipping route. So maritime security is inviolable for us. Last but not least, Sri Lanka's two closest neighbors are also nuclear armed states, India and Pakistan. And it's a reality we face. And the bilateral relations between the two countries, Manpreet, unfortunately, are characterized by a regular pattern of adversity and rivalry. And also they are enmeshed, both countries are enmeshed in the geopolitical rivalry of US-China, maybe involuntarily, but they are, because it's a fact of life. So any nuclear exchange by accident, by miscalculation, or by non-state players playing mischief can have massive devastating effects on these most densely populated area. So we have a vested interest. Not that we can shape the policies of these countries, but in friendly persuasion, we have extremely good relations with both countries in friendly persuasion, and by talking to them as friends to see whether things can be kept cool at the beginning and no escalation and so forth, and also involve them in a larger multilateral process so that everybody has confidence that these weapons, until they last, until real ideal world of nuclear disarmament happens, they are kept under check. So there is a vital national security. Especially because we don't seem to have effective regional cooperation as such in South Asia.
I think the whole point about South Asian security and because the West taught us to look at it like that, we've only framed it in the context of nuclear rivalry and contestation between India and Pakistan. But I think if we could focus more on South Asian connectivity, South Asian better relationships in general, that would help us to address some of the other issues as well. Wonderful having this conversation with you, sir. Thanks for sparing the time despite your such hectic travel schedules. I think in times like this, members like yourself from the Asia Pacific Leadership Network become extremely important to help us understand what is happening right now, that things had gone wrong in the past as well, but we managed, and to draw those lessons as to what can take us into the future. So really grateful for this, sir. Thank you very much.